It is 12:30. Hello, everybody. Hello, everybody joining us for one-on-one with Campus Advocacy Network and the Gender and Sexuality Center. We are live on the CAN Facebook page, as well as the GSC Facebook page. Hopefully you can join us, tell people. We are so excited for the kickoff of the spring semester's first one-on-one. My name is Moises Villada. My pronouns are he, him, and his, and I am the Associate Director at the Gender and Sexuality. Welcome, everyone. Take it over, Ada.
Oh, now I'm getting really fancy. I'm better at technology now. Hi, everybody. Welcome to One-on-One with Ken and GSC. Ada Cheng here. I'm the Education and Outreach Specialist for Campus Advocacy Network. We're so excited to be here. We collaborate on this project, invite special guests from everywhere on campus, and we're going to talk about subjects that are personal. We hope that our guests will be willing to be vulnerable. And this is a very different kind of lunch break. We want to get to know people deeper, in a more personal way, going beyond the facade, right, of our work role. This is why we're doing this. And so today, we have a very special guest, Jennifer Jackson, assistant professor for the University Library. I'm just going to go ahead and introduce Jennifer, co-chair for UIC Chancellor's Committee on the Status of Persons with Disabilities, executive board member for the Illinois Library Association. And for Jennifer, the most important aspect of her work is to advocate for underrepresented populations on campus or everywhere in the community. Hi, Jennifer. Welcome. So let me say this: Happy New Year, Happy Lunar New Year. All right, tomorrow is the Lunar New Year, so I just want to say Happy New Year. Say a few words, and then Moises will ask you for the first question.
Hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm excited to be speaking with two people that I love talking with. So I look forward to the conversation we're going to have today.
Very
Wonderful.
good.
We are so excited to have you. Welcome, and welcome to everybody who's joining us and watching. You know, we always start our conversations because that's really what it is, the conversations, to get to know you, to connect on some of the themes that may come up. And the first question we actually always ask our guests is to tell us a little bit about what it was like for you to be a college student or a student, you know, however, as broadly as you want to interpret that. What were you like as a student?
I think, and I thought about this, I definitely was not the person that I am today. I think as a college student, I was someone who was very awkward, someone who wasn't sure of themselves, really. It was a time for learning and growing for me. But as I reflect back on that time, I just was not prepared in so many ways. It was the first time that I was on my own. I was away from my parents. I think I had the added challenge of learning how to advocate for myself, not just as a person, but as a person with a disability. For those that don't know me, I have cerebral palsy. So that's a condition that I've had since birth. But I think as you grow and you become an adult and you're away from home, some of the things that I think I really took for granted came out when I went to college, learning how to advocate for myself, learning to speak up for myself, and really trying to navigate this and still be a teenager learning to be an adult, right? I think was the type of person that I was. I think I definitely learned a lot, but I was just very unsure of myself back in college.
So earlier we were chatting, you went to school at UIC Urbana-Champaign. And in your bio, you talk about as a disabled African-American woman. advocating for underrepresented population. That's really essence of your work. And based on what you just said, what, as a college student, what were the obstacles that you were encountering on campus? Can you give us some specific examples that you will need to advocate for yourself?
Absolutely. Now, unfortunately, this is still a challenge for many students with disability today. But when you get your accommodation letter and you show it to your professor, and you need to have those accommodations and you get pushback from professors, what's this? I've never seen this before. Do I have to do this? Yes, you have to do this, right? And, kind of being caught off guard. I think I was super blessed in my kind of high school and elementary education because my mother is someone with a background in special education. So she was very aware of what I needed in terms of what needed to be in my IEP, in terms of understanding like my own abilities and what I was capable of doing, but also, advocating that these accommodations still need to be made. So I didn't have my mother. You can't take your mother with you when you go to college, nor should you. And so learning how to advocate, learning how to make sure to check in with people if I was encountering problems. I think one of the things that I also took for granted, but was a challenge at time, was just realizing how many physical barriers there were sometimes just in terms of getting around campus. I think UIUC does a great job, but one of the things that always was very upsetting to me was how far away that office is to the rest of campus. So trying to get to the office was always a little bit of a challenge for me. So like a lot of it was the personal navigating through class. And then the physical aspects of like being on a large campus, because it's very different from UIC, right? Where UIUC is not a commuter campus for the most part. So you're living in dorms, you're traveling to different places. I was learning to take the bus and just get my way around town. So yeah, those were the two biggest, I think, day-to-day challenges that I often encountered.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. How did you begin to cope with all of these barriers? I think it's kind of like two linked questions, if I may. One is, how did you begin to cope with all of these elements that you were kind of facing? And then maybe at what point did you start embracing it as part of your identities and as part of your process? I know that's a big question, but just kind of, how does that land for you?
I think for me, unfortunately, the way that I had to learn how to kind of get to that point was really through trial and error. I think, unfortunately, there were some major life events that happened to me in college and had to do with kind of me pursuing my academic paths and, coming up on barriers where people weren't necessarily being respectful of the laws that are in place for people with disabilities. And also realizing the ways in which, one, my disability is an issue, but also understanding the ways in which my identity as a Black person was also going to be an issue, not for me, but for the people that I had to interact and engage with. And so it was there where I really started to learn to have a voice. It was not the easiest time in my life because you feel like everybody's against you and you're not quite understanding what's happening. And again, you're by yourself. I think I also, while you're trying to do all of this, I think one of the things that I wish I would have taken greater advantage of was really trying to find a sense of community. I don't necessarily feel I had that. And I feel some of the onus was on myself. I think I really felt isolated. I really felt alone. And I don't know if I necessarily had the skills to reach out and ask to see, what other resources, what other people are experiencing this. Is there anybody else who's like me that's going through this? And so I think sometimes with some of the challenges that I face them alone. Not to say that it would have been better or worse, but to know that you have that community would have really helped. But I think because of those things that happened, I was really able to find my voice, learn how to advocate, learn to figure out what to say, what not to say. And it was really from those challenges and those obstacles and that adversity that I was really able to kind of grow as a person.
You know, you were talking about it's not just disabilities, but also being a African American woman, right? And essentially that intersectional. And when you were saying that, when you're talking about how being alone, I do wonder sometimes within racial ethnic communities, we don't necessarily talk about disabilities, right? And then within the disability community, there's assumption, right? The whiteness pervades, right? And so I wonder, you kind of the person in between, but also the bridge that connects these two. Can you talk more about that in terms of how do you navigate as somebody with complex intersectional identities in spaces that may not validate one, but may not validate the other? How do you navigate that complexity?
Yeah, I think that is something that's still a challenge. I don't know if I necessarily have an answer to that, right? Because I was thinking about that, and one, I was going down to UIUC as a disabled student, but also I was going down there as a Black student. And for those that may not be aware, like UIUC and UI, the system still struggles with increasing their enrollment numbers of African American students. So oftentimes, even when I would go to classes, I would typically be the only African American, or maybe one of two African Americans, particularly once I got into my coursework. And so, one, you're navigating that, but then you become confronted with, maybe in that same setting, a professor who's like, why do you need extended time on tests? This is going to date me a little bit, but why do you need to have your laptop in class? Why do you need to have a recorder in class? And it was like, these are the things that I need in order to be successful. And I went to school right before, technology was a thing and before it became normalized for everybody to have a device in class. So, it's also like, and then you're looking at people looking at you. Well, why does she get to have that? And so just trying to navigate that space and those different things at the same time, I think, is always challenging. And I don't necessarily know if there's an answer to it. I think for anybody that's in the same situation or anybody that's listening, I think my advice is just keep going. It may seem very challenging, and that may seem like a very easy thing to say, but the process is actually really daunting. The other thing that I spoke out before, like, try and find those communities, right? Again, that is also a daunting task, trying to find those communities and feeling comfortable enough to do that. But I think in hindsight, I would have much rather been uncomfortable for a little bit of time doing the work and trying to find those communities, as opposed to feeling alone and isolated in the process.
And I was going to ask about that, Alex. I think you mentioned communities, and I was wondering if there was a moment or moments that helped you connect to community, and how you kind of found your community during that process.
So I think in undergrad, it was a little bit more challenging. I think I was definitely able to make connections with people here and there, but were they like deep connections with people? That's a separate issue. Like, sometimes there are levels to the connections and the type of relationships we have with people. And so I think I was able to maybe make these surface level connections with people, but not anything deep. And again, I think I still felt really unsure about myself as a person, and dealt with self-esteem issues, and all those things that kind of come on us as young adults going into new spaces. And so I sometimes I would make those connections, right? But then I wouldn't necessarily stick with them. You also kind of have to keep, again, that's why you say keep going, because I'll be like, oh, well, I tried this. I don't want to do it anymore. So never, because it was like, I don't want to do it. I don't know what I'm doing. So I won't pursue this anymore. Whereas, like, if I would have given it, and that's what I tell people, if you're trying something new, give yourself a good I would say, maybe like 2 to 3 months to become acclimated, to learn how to adapt to the situation. Now, if you really don't feel it and you're like, no, this is not for me, then fine, move on and try something else. But don't tap out completely. And I think sometimes, my nerves would get the better of me. And so oftentimes it was hopping around to different communities, right? And it still wasn't the community. So sometimes I would do activities directly for disabled students. Sometimes I was heavily involved in like church functions and like religious functions. And then I'd be like, no, I don't want to do that. And then sometimes I would try the art scene. But again, and that's my background. So I got my bachelor's in fine arts. And so like sometimes I would feel more comfortable in that, but I would always be jumping around. And I think that's good. I think that's the other thing. You need to have multiple communities because we all have multiple identities. But I would also say try to be consistent, like learn yourself and know what you want to do and don't want to do. Oftentimes we know what we don't want to do before we know what we do. But keep going.
I want to, a few things. I want to go back to something you mentioned very early on. It is very difficult to build and maintain community as is on a large, let's say, public, state university, right? I mean, just look at UIC Chicago campus. It's very difficult. But it's far more difficult when you confront structural obstacles that doesn't ease the accessibility. And earlier you were talking about, very early on, you talk about how, let's say, disability office is so far off that made it very difficult for you to get to. And I recall we had similar conversation, within CAN about, how do we make it accessible for sexual assault survivors to report cases? So it's this, how do you ease the access for people with needs? And based on your experience there or here, what do you see? What was it difficult for the university to take into considerations of the needs of the underrepresented populations?
I think, in terms of like what I think people need to do to make it more accessible, I think, and this is hard, right? Because thinking about, my 18-year-old self, I don't think I would have been open to doing like a focus group or talking to like a large group of people, right? That was one of the things that I dealt with a lot in college was social anxiety. So large groups was not a thing. I think if different communities or groups or institutions want to figure out how to make things accessible, also have different options where people can provide their feedback, right? And provide, so maybe I would have done better if someone wanted to do a one-on-one interview with me. One of the things that always puts me at ease is food, right? So you feed me, you give me some candy, you talk to me, you make me comfortable, that's different. Also, like creating opportunities where people can reflect in writing, right? Some people aren't great about reflecting verbally on what they need necessarily. So, having an opportunity for them to give a written response or, a lot of the times, and I don't, the technology is such that I think we could do that now, but maybe people can give like an audio response, not necessarily where they're on the phone, but maybe they can speak into their phone, they can deliver the MP3, and then you have that. So I think creating those opportunities to provide the feedback is helpful. I think sometimes, and this is the other thing, it's always going to be a challenge. But I think, based on my experience, there was a lot of ways where institutions could have done better. I think, of course, I would have loved it if they could have moved the building, right? But that wasn't going to happen. The building needed to stay as is, I think. But one of the things that would have been a huge help to me is having, these are the routes, these are the bus routes, these are the things that are accessible, these are the things you need to know as a disabled person using these routes. These are kind of key things on campus that you can easily get to. I think helping in the orientation process and checking in with people, I think that was one of the things that I thought was interesting. As a Black student, they knew we were automatically labeled at risk. So we had to do these kind of things, or we'd have to check in with an advisor or check in with a graduate student and do these different things. But I don't remember those same kind of check-ins as a student with a disability. And so what would it have looked like if I would have had a check-in with another, what if I had a check-in with a graduate student with a disability? Like, then I think my outlook would have looked a little bit different, right? As opposed to like being Black. Because I think by that point in my life, I understood what it meant to be Black, and that I was always going to be in this position of being othered, particularly one, given my career path, given what I had been through in my high school career, having pursued honors and doing these different things and doing the arts and all these other things. I was very aware of the ways I was othered being Black. I wasn't necessarily aware or had the language to articulate those issues as a person with a disability.
I appreciate your vulnerability and the way you're kind of sharing all of these different elements and barriers to your lived experience, right? I'm wondering, like, in those, I know those were all moments that were challenging. And I'm also kind of wondering, like, what were the moments of joy, if any, that you were that came up for you, came up for you during this whole time as a student?
I think there were probably moments of joy sprinkled here and there. I think, when I would have those opportunities to be with people that I felt completely comfortable with, completely connected to, and I realize that now, looking back, some 20 years later, because, as you get older, your friends change, your circles change, things change. But, I was reflecting, there's probably only a handful of people that I still talk to from college. There's one person that I talk to quite often, and we're just surprised to see, how paths change and how different things have changed. But I remember those times that I had with her, right? Because we would go to house parties and then I would fall asleep on her couch, and, but it was completely comfortable. Like, she would ask me, are you okay? Do you need anything? Are you feeling comfortable? Where, like, sometimes other people aren't asking those questions because they feel just as uncomfortable as you. But I think she was the type of person where we really were able to connect. I mean, we would spend times, both of us were art majors at the time. And so we would have these sessions where I would go to her house and I would paint. I love that, right? It was probably the more quiet times in my academic life that I appreciate, not necessarily like all of the, there's the first time experiences of like going to a party or drinking, and like, those are okay, right? I think oftentimes we do those things. I know I did those things because I wanted to fit in. It wasn't necessarily that I enjoyed it. I wanted to fit in, and I wanted people to accept me, and I wanted all these other things that I wanted people to think about me, but it wasn't necessarily the best thing for me to do for myself in that moment. So I think it was those quiet times. Also, again, because I was an art major, studio times, right? You might be at studio till 12, 1 o'clock in the morning. So again, it was a lot of the quieter times that I really appreciated and found joy in. And I think, again, as I got older, and particularly as I went into grad school, I understood myself a little bit better. I understood, therefore, then I could understand other people a little bit better, what I wanted for myself, what I didn't like, what I do like. I think I was still growing as a friend and learning to be a good friend. But yeah, in terms of what moments of joy, is the quieter one-on-one times with people I really appreciated.
One thing you mentioned that was so important when you say, you were trying to fit in, right? When you were a college student, and you describe yourself as shy and awkward. But I probably wouldn't see you as shy and awkward right now. Is there? And then look back at college and or graduate school. Was there a pivotal moment where you realized I don't really need to fit in? I can just be myself, be my authentic. I just need to be me. Was there something that happened that made you realize that and you stop trying to conform?
I think really at the end of my undergraduate career and then going into my graduate career, because that's the other thing, right? And this is me, but like as a Black disabled woman, I'm at this point, I think we're making some strides as a society, but I'm still probably going to be othered in a lot of different situations. That still unfortunately happens even now as a professional. And so knowing that I'm still going to be othered by other people, what does it matter if I conform to their standards or not, right? Why not just be myself? Be comfortable with who I am, learn to have the vocabulary to articulate particular things, right? So I can have conversations with people, so I can advocate when I need to advocate, so I can say when I have an issue with something, as opposed to being shy and quiet. Because that was the thing. I realized, when I was younger, I didn't want to say anything because you don't want to rock the boat. You don't want to make people mad. You don't want people to be mad at you. And it was like I wouldn't say anything, and that would put me sometimes in a worse situation because I didn't say anything, right? People then thought that they could say or do other things because it's like, I'm not responding to it, therefore she must be okay with it. And actually I wasn't. I'm not okay with it. And so rather than not saying anything, I realized I have to say something, but I have to learn how to say it in a way that makes me comfortable, right? And so that took some time. That wasn't something that happened overnight. That took some, conversations in the mirror. That took some practicing. That took speaking to people who were slightly older than me and had some more lived experience, and really understanding and just hearing them, right? You don't have to take every person's advice, but I think you need to be open to hearing the experiences of others, and taking what you can from those things, and applying it in the ways that you can apply it.
I love that. I love that you came into your empowerment by all of these different ways. We have 3 minutes left, and maybe the last question we have is, what is some advice to a student or campus community who's watching this today and are navigating their own journeys through their multiple intersecting identities? Anything you want to share? Any wisdom you would like to contribute?
I would say, one, know that you're not alone. You're really not. You're not alone. If you're having issues, and I'll say this too, I think I struggled a lot. I struggled a lot with anxiety. I struggled a lot with depression. Those things were part of my experience. If you're struggling with those things, that's okay too. I would advise you to, again, find your communities, seek out help, seek out resources. I think it's harder now as a young person because you have Instagram and you have people wanting to do the glow up and all this other stuff. And now you're having the experiences in a pandemic, right? So it looks very different. But, do what you can to find community. Take this time. It's a quieter time. So if you can, take this time to understand and learn about yourself more, what you want, what you don't want, what you want to achieve, what you don't, the people that you want in the life versus the people you'd rather not have in your life. Take some time, journal it, talk it out by yourself, talk it out with other people, and keep going. I said this earlier, but it's so important to keep going. And I know it's hard and I know it sucks and some days are better than others, but keep going.
We have 1 minute left. I have one comment and I'm going to wrap up the show. Something, Jennifer, you mentioned is so important that you feel since you're going to be honored, why not just be the authentic self? Yesterday, a teller on my show says this: I can't PhD my way out of my working class immigrant identity. So I just might as well be authentic self. And that is so important, to affirm our self-identity, right? Maintain our authenticity, maintain integrity and honesty. That's really important. That's the purpose. We're at 1:00. We're done. How do you feel, Jennifer?
This was great. I loved it. I hope the people who were listening loved it. I really enjoyed talking and sharing my experience. So thank you so much. I really appreciated this.
And Moises, how do you feel, my work buddy?
Feeling great to be back. Thank you, Jennifer, for such wonderful points and just being so vulnerable and sharing. And also to the folks who have been commenting, Tanya, Margaret, Natalie. So just thank you for everybody who's checking in. And thanks everybody who joined us.
Absolutely. Everyone, bye. This is now, we make it a monthly show. So look out for our announcement. We have another exciting guest. And Jennifer, thank you so much for being vulnerable, honest. I love you. We love you. And Moises, I love you.
Love
everybody.
You all.
Bye. Happy New Year, Lunar New
Happy
Year.
New Year.
Bye. Thank you
Take
so
care,
much.
everybody.